The void of space stretched silent and endless, broken only by the hum of a single Terran patrol craft gliding through the darkness. Captain Arik Hayden sat in the pilot chair, eyes fixed on the flickering screens. His ship, the Vigilant Ray, drifting along the forgotten borders of the Orion Drift. It was supposed to be a quiet patrol, another routine mission no one cared about, a lonely duty in a quiet sector. Arik had done this route 100 times, yet tonight felt different. The stars seemed colder, sharper, like they were watching. Suddenly the radar pinged. A faint blip appeared at the edge of his scope. Arik frowned and leaned forward, increasing magnification. The signal was weak, irregular, but there was no mistaking the pattern. A distress beacon. He adjusted the frequency and his blood ran cold. The code wasn't Terran, it was Vulpine. That made no sense. The Vulpine Empire hadn't been seen in this region for years. Not since the old war ended. Still, the signal pulsed again. Faint but desperate. "Computer, trace signal origin," he ordered. His voice steady, though his heart raced. Coordinates appeared. Less than 10 minutes away. Near an asteroid field on the system's far rim. Arik hesitated. He was under orders not to engage any alien craft, but he couldn't ignore a distress call. Not even from an old enemy. He gritted his teeth and pushed the throttle forward. Engines roared to life, the small craft leaping into motion. As the ship neared the source, the comms filled with static and faint noise. A broken transmission in the Vulpine language. Through the thick dust and debris of shattered asteroids, Arik saw it, a burning wreck spinning slowly. Its hull was torn open, leaking glowing plasma into the dark. He activated the floodlights, revealing the curved silver lines of Vulpine engineering. Elegant even in ruin, bodies drifted outside. Armor cracked, tails limp. He felt a weight in his chest. War or not, this was a massacre. Scanning for life signs, he whispered. The computer beeped softly. One faint heartbeat detected inside the wreck. Without thinking, Arik grabbed his helmet and a medkit. Locking the airlock sequence. "Open bay doors," he commanded. The outer hatch hissed open, and the freezing emptiness of space greeted him. He fired the thrusters on his suit and drifted toward the burning remains of the alien ship. Inside the wreck, sparks floated like fireflies. Wires hung like vines from the ceiling. The smell of burnt metal and coolant filled the air. Arik's light swept across the corridor until it stopped on a small figure trapped under debris. It was a Vulpine female, her fur singed. Her armor cracked, one arm pinned beneath a steel beam. He could see her chest rising weakly, golden eyes half open. Watching him with confusion and fear. "It's okay. I'm here to help," he said through his suit speaker. She hissed softly, baring sharp teeth, but the effort made her cough. Arik ignored the threat and wedged his shoulders under the beam, grunting as he pushed. With a final shove, the metal gave way, freeing her body. He lifted her carefully, surprised at how light she was, her fur shimmering faintly under the flickering light. Blood matted her side, her breathing shallow. She tried to speak, words in her native tongue spilling out. But Arik couldn't understand. "Save your strength," he murmured, adjusting the oxygen mask over her mouth. Her hand weakly gripped his wrist, claws barely scratching the armor. Then her eyes rolled back and she went limp. Arik looked around once more. No other survivors, just endless destruction. He fired the suit's thrusters and carried her back toward the Vigilant Ray. As they floated through the void, the alien ship exploded behind them in a silent burst of light. Fragments scattered like glowing ashes. Fading into the dark, Arik didn't look back. He focused only on keeping her alive. Once inside, he sealed the airlock and rushed her to the medbay. The ship's AI activated surgical lights, scanning the patient. "Severe trauma, oxygen deprivation, internal bleeding," the voice reported. Arik's hands moved quickly, patching wounds, stabilizing vitals, injecting nanomed kits. Minutes stretched like hours until finally the scanner displayed a weak but steady pulse. He exhaled deeply, leaning against the table, staring at her. She was unlike anything he'd seen up close before. Fur of soft silver, delicate facial markings like faint tribal lines. Even in pain, she looked fierce, proud. Arik wondered what she had been doing so far from her empire, and why she was alone. He reached for the comms to report, but then stopped. Something told him not to call it in yet. Not until he knew more. If Command found out he rescued a Vulpine soldier, they'd order her terminated or imprisoned. But looking at her, broken yet breathing, he couldn't do that. He sighed and whispered to himself, "Guess you're my responsibility now." Outside, the stars shifted as his ship drifted away from the wreck, Far behind, a faint red beacon blinked once, then vanished. Arik didn't notice, but someone somewhere had just locked onto his signal. He turned down the lights. The hum of the engine steady and soft. In the med bay, the Vulpine's fingers twitched. Her ears flicked, and she whispered a single word in her sleep. Human. Arik stared, unsure if he imagined it. Then he sat back in his chair, eyes heavy. The silence of deep space pressing against the hull. He didn't know it yet, but rescuing that one alien girl would soon set the galaxy on fire. Soft blue lights glowed in the med bay, the hum of engines the only sound. Arik sat beside the bed, arms folded, eyes fixed on the sleeping Vulpine. He had been watching her for hours, waiting for any sign of movement. The ship drifted quietly through empty space, far from any patrol routes, far from anyone who might ask questions. A faint gasp broke the silence. Her chest rose sharply, her golden eyes snapping open. Arik stood quickly, careful but alert. The alien woman tried to sit up, but pain forced her back, her fur bristling in confusion. She looked around, ears twitching, gaze landing on the human standing near her. "It's okay," Arik said slowly, raising both hands to show peace. "You're safe? You're aboard my ship." The translator chip in his wrist projected a soft version of her own language. The Vulpine blinked, processing the words. Her breathing uneven. Her name came out in a whisper. "Lyra," Arik nodded. Repeating it, "Lyra, you were in a crash. Your ship was destroyed, I pulled you out." Lyra's tail flicked nervously, her golden eyes narrowing. "Why?" she asked, her accent sharp. Distrust dripping from the single word. Arik paused, then shrugged. "Because it was the right thing to do." She studied him in silence, trying to understand. No human had ever been described to her this way. Calm, quiet, kind. She looked down at the bandages on her side, touching them carefully. The pain was real, but so was the warmth in her chest. Her people had always taught that humans were dangerous, ruthless survivors from a death world, yet this one had risked his life for her. Her thoughts tangled like starlight through glass. Suddenly a deep alarm tone echoed through the ship, red lights flashing across the panels. Arik rushed to the cockpit, Lyra flinching at the sudden sound. He scanned the sensors, an approaching vessel. Unidentified fast, his stomach dropped. The Vulpine cruiser had found them. Lyra limped into the doorway, clutching her side. "They're hunting survivors," she said weakly. "They will destroy you if they find me here." Arik turned, his expression firm. "Then we won't let them." He shut down the main engines and dimmed the lights, sliding the ship into a nearby asteroid field. The rocks spun like silent giants, shadows hiding their path through the viewport. The enemy ship appeared, unsleek and deadly, scanning beams sweeping through the debris. Lyra's ears twitched at every sound, her claws gripping the chair. Arik worked the controls with steady hands, guiding his craft between tumbling asteroids, each movement precise and quiet. One wrong move and they'd be vaporized. The cruiser's sensors pulsed again, sweeping closer. Lyra whispered a prayer in her native tongue, her voice trembling. Arik glanced at her and smirked slightly. "Don't worry. I've been running from things bigger than me all my life." The cruiser passed by slowly, its lights fading into the distance. For a moment, neither of them breathed. Then silence returned. Lyra exhaled shakily, her eyes glimmering in the dim light. "You risked your life again," she said softly. Arik didn't answer right away. He just checked the instruments, making sure the danger was gone. Finally, he looked at her and said, "Guess I have a bad habit of saving people." Lyra tilted her head, confused but intrigued. In her world, saving someone meant claiming them. Ownership, loyalty, bond. But the human seemed to expect nothing in return. Later, as the ship drifted in the safety of the asteroid field, Arik prepared a ration pack. He handed her a small container of nutrient broth. She sniffed it cautiously before sipping, her tail flicking once in approval. "It tastes like metal and smoke," she said. Arik chuckled. "That's because it is, for the first time." Lyra smiled, just a small curve of her lips, but it softened her entire face. Arik noticed, though he pretended not to. He sat opposite her, studying the damage readouts on his wrist display. Her ship's transponder was gone, but the cruiser's movements suggested they would return soon. "They didn't have long, Lyra," he said quietly. "Why were you out here? This sector is empty, no colonies, no trade routes." She hesitated, then looked down, her voice low. "Because I tried to stop something." Arik frowned. "Stop what?" Her eyes lifted, glowing faintly in the dark. A new war. The words hit him like a blast wave. Lyra explained that her fleet had been ordered to scout Deathworlder space again. Her commander wanted proof that humanity's strength had faded. When she refused the mission, they accused her of treason. They shot her ship down before she could escape. Now the Empire would erase any trace of her existence. Arik listened silently, his jaw tight. If she was telling the truth, the peace humanity had bled for was already crumbling. He realized that saving her wasn't just an act of mercy. It might have just made him a target of two empires. But when he looked at her, he saw more than danger. He saw courage, guilt, and the same exhaustion he felt, the kind that came from fighting too long. He leaned back, staring at the stars through the cockpit glass. "Guess we're both running from something," he said. Lyra nodded slowly, eyes reflecting starlight. "For now," she whispered, "we run together." Outside, the asteroids drifted like frozen ghosts, the galaxy vast and silent somewhere far behind them. The Vulpine cruiser changed course, scanning the void again. And deep inside the ship, Vigilant Ray, two fugitives, one human, one alien, began a fragile alliance that would soon shake the stars. The silence of deep space didn't last long. Barely an hour after slipping through the asteroid field, the radar came alive again. Arik's eyes narrowed as red blips began multiplying across the screen. The Vulpine cruiser had returned, and this time it wasn't alone. 3 smaller ships flanked it, fast interceptors built for hunting and killing. Lyra's ears flattened as she read the incoming signals. "They've deployed trackers," she said softly, her voice shaking. "They know my energy signature." Arik clenched his fists around the controls. "Then we changed the game." He shut down all main systems again, plunging the ship into darkness. Only the faint glow from the instrument panels lit their faces. The sound of metal groaning filled the cabin as debris brushed past the hull. Arik maneuvered the ship between chunks of rock the size of houses. The interceptors swept through the field, scanning with long beams of blue light. Lyra watched, tail wrapped around her knees, her breathing shallow, every time one of the scanning lights passed close. Her fur shimmered like silver flame. "You need to mask your biosignature," Arik whispered. Reaching for a small injector from the med kit, Lyra hesitated but then nodded, letting him apply the compound that dimmed her energy output. As the cold mist touched her skin, her heartbeat slowed, her glow fading. Their ship now appeared lifeless, just another frozen wreck drifting through the void. Minutes passed, then an hour, each second stretched into eternity. Arik barely blinked, his eyes glued to the sensors. Lyra could hear his pulse through the quiet hum of the air system, steady and strong. For a human, he was remarkably calm finally, one by one. The enemy signals began to fade, disappearing beyond the range of their scanners. Lyra let out a slow breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "It worked," she whispered. Relief soft in her voice, Arik leaned back in his chair, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "For now," he said quietly. "But they'll be back. And next time they won't search us, they'll burn everything." Lyra looked at him, her eyes reflecting the pale light of the stars. "You don't have to keep running because of me," she said. "They won't stop until I'm gone." Arik turned his head, his expression unreadable. "I don't leave people behind," he replied simply. "Not after I've saved them." There was no hesitation in his voice, no calculation, just conviction. And that scared Lyra more than the enemy, because she had seen soldiers die for orders, but never for kindness. She stood and limped to the viewport. Staring out at the endless dark, her mind replayed the destruction of her ship, the betrayal, the screams of her crew. Humans were supposed to be monsters, yet the real monsters wore her own uniform. Behind her, Arik began adjusting the power relays, restarting the engines one circuit at a time. The lights flickered on, soft and warm. The human ship came alive again, like a heartbeat returning after near death. As they drifted toward open space, Arik checked the coordinates. "We're heading to an old relay station," he said. "Long abandoned, but it still has data storage." Lyra frowned. "Why go there?" He glanced at her. "Because your ship's black box was broadcasting before it died. Maybe we can retrieve the transmission logs." Her ears perked slightly. Realizing his plan, he wanted to prove her story. He wanted evidence that the Vulpine Empire had reignited the Deathworlder War. The journey was slow, the Vigilant Ray creeping through a graveyard of forgotten satellites and wrecked ships. Old battles had been fought here, relics of a time when humanity and the Vulpine fleets had filled the stars with fire. Lyra ran her fingers across a cracked window, gazing at the floating debris. "This place feels haunted," she murmured. Arik nodded. "Maybe it is." As they neared the relay, alarms began to flicker again. "Unregistered signal detected," the computer announced. Lyra's fur bristled. "That's not Vulpine," she said. "That's something else." Arik squinted at the readouts. "It's Terran, a human drone, ancient but still active, floated near the relay, its paint scorched and sensors blinking faintly." "From the old war," Arik whispered. "Still following orders after all this time?" Lyra tilted her head, eyes narrowing. "Orders to do what?" The answer came too fast and the drone suddenly lit up. "Charging its weapon systems. Destroy all hostiles," Arik finished. Pulling the ship into a sharp roll, bolts of plasma cut through the dark. Grazing their shields, Arik dodged left, then right, the small craft twisting between wrecks. The drone followed, relentless. Lyra gripped the side of the cockpit, shouting, "Can't you disable it?" "Working on it," Arik said, his hands flying over the controls. Sweat on his brow. He rerouted the power grid, overloading one of the rear thrusters. The vigilant ray shot forward, baiting the drone through the broken hull of a dead battleship. At the last second, Arik fired the thruster burst, igniting leaking fuel tanks in the debris. A blinding explosion swallowed the drone, the light filling the cockpit like sunrise. When it cleared, the wreckage drifted silently once more. Arik exhaled slowly, his voice calm. "Target neutralized." Lyra turned toward him, awe in her eyes. "You fight like a Vulpine general," she said quietly. He smirked. "Nah, I just hate losing," the quiet returned. Heavy but peaceful, Lyra sat beside him, her tail brushing lightly against his arm. For the first time, she felt safe. Not because of walls or weapons, but because of him. She didn't understand why this human cared so much, but deep down, she sensed something powerful growing between them. A bond neither of them could break. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. But somewhere far away, on a Vulpine command ship, a transmission flickered to life. A voice said, "We found them." The hunt wasn't over, not even close. The stars outside shimmered faintly as the vigilant ray drifted near the silent relay station. Its broken antennas floated like the bones of an ancient creature, motionless and cold inside the cockpit. Only the faint hum of life support filled the air. Arik sat quietly at the controls, his face half lit by the soft glow of the console. Lyra sat beside him, her gaze fixed on the dark void beyond the glass. Neither spoke for a while, yet the silence between them felt comfortable. After hours of running, fighting, and nearly dying, the quiet now felt like a gift. Arik's mind replayed every decision, rescuing her, defying orders, attacking the drone. He knew if command ever found out, he'd be court-martialed. Maybe worse, but when he looked at her, he couldn't bring himself to regret anything. Lyra's ears twitched slightly, sensing his unease. "You're afraid," she said softly. Not as an accusation, but as an observation. Arik glanced at her and smiled faintly. "Only of paperwork." She tilted her head, puzzled, then let out a small laugh, quiet but real. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. For a moment it made the cold ship feel alive again. After checking the sensors, Arik powered down the engines. They needed to conserve energy while accessing the relay's data port. He floated out through the maintenance hatch with a small toolkit. Lyra insisted on joining him despite her injuries. "I know Vulpine encryption," she said. "You don't," Arik hesitated, then nodded. "Stay close and don't drift away." Outside, the two figures moved slowly through the silent wreckage. Their light swept over old battle scars, broken hulls, and faded insignias from a war long gone. The relay loomed above them like a floating tomb. Lyra placed her hand on its surface, the metal cold under her fingers. "This station once watched both our worlds burn," she murmured. Arik said nothing, but the truth in her words cut deep. They reached the data core, its systems flickering weakly. Arik connected a cable from his suit to the terminal. Lyra entered commands in her language, her claws tapping softly on the pad. The screen glowed, displaying fragments of video logs. Suddenly, an image flickered. The final transmission from her ship. Her crew's voices filled their helmets, panicked and broken. Then came the order. A voice Lyra recognized instantly. "Purge the witness. Destroy the evidence." Her hands trembled, the reflection of the screen shaking in her eyes. Arik looked at her, his voice steady. "That's proof." Lyra nodded slowly, tears glinting in zero gravity, floating like tiny crystals. They killed my friends to keep this secret, she whispered. Arik saved the file, compressing it into his datapad. This changes everything, he said quietly. If we get this to command, they'll have to believe you, but Lyra shook her head. No, they won't. Your command will see me as a threat. Not an ally, Arik frowned, realizing she was right. The peace between their species was fragile. One spark could reignite the entire war. He closed the terminal, his jaw tight. Then we make sure the truth survives. Even if we don't, they floated back toward the ship in silence. Inside the airlock, Lyra leaned against the wall. Exhausted, her breathing heavy, Arik reached to steady her, and for a brief second their hands touched. Her fur was warm against his glove, her eyes soft but unreadable. Why do you care so much? She asked quietly. You don't even know me. Arik paused, searching for words. Because someone should have cared before it came to this, he said simply. Lyra stared at him, her tail slowly curling around her leg. In her world, compassion was seen as weakness, yet this human wore it like armor. She didn't understand him, but she wanted to, later. When Arik fell asleep in the pilot's chair, Lyra watched him silently, the steady rhythm of his breathing, the faint scar on his temple, the way his hand still rested near his weapon. He looked both fragile and dangerous at once, she whispered softly in her tongue. Strange human. Before closing her eyes outside, a small beacon on the destroyed relay flickered once. A hidden subroutine had awakened, transmitting a signal far across the stars. Far away in the dark halls of the Vulpine High Command, a console lit up, a deep voice growled, "The traitor lives." Dozens of ships began to stir. Engines roared to life, hunting coordinates already locked. Back on the vigilant ray, Arik woke suddenly. Sensing something was wrong, he looked out the viewport. The stars seemed to ripple. Somewhere out there, death was coming. But for now, in the fragile peace between human and alien, there was something neither of them could name, a bond silent but strong, like gravity itself pulling them together. And though neither spoke it aloud, both knew they would fight for each other, no matter what came next. The hum of the engines echoed softly through the vigilant ray. The stars outside drifted by in endless silence, their light shimmering across the ship's worn metal hull. Inside, Arik sat at the comm station, trying to stabilize the new data they had recovered. Lyra watched from behind him, her tail swaying slowly, her golden eyes unreadable. We have to send this to command, Arik said, his voice firm. If we can prove your story, they might stop what's coming. Lyra hesitated. Your command doesn't trust aliens. They'll see me as the enemy before they see the truth. Arik looked over his shoulder. Then I'll make them listen. He keyed in the transmission frequency, opening a secure Terran military channel. Static filled the air, followed by a calm mechanical voice. Identify yourself, Captain Arik Hayden. Terran Patrol Division, he said. Urgent report. I have classified evidence regarding hostile Vulpine operations. The line crackled. Then a female officer's voice came through. Captain Hayden, your signal is off route. Transmit coordinates immediately for extraction. Arik exhaled in relief. Finally, he muttered. But Lyra's ears twitched sharply, her instincts freezing her in place. Something's wrong, she whispered. Arik frowned. What do you mean? Lyra leaned closer to the console, her claws tapping lightly against the metal. The frequency pattern. It's too clean, too perfect. No human transmission is that stable in deep space. She adjusted the scanner, her eyes narrowing. A second layer of data appeared beneath the signal. Hidden code pulses repeating every 3 seconds. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That's a Vulpine tracer code. Arik's blood turned cold. You're saying... Yes, she interrupted. They're tracing your message. They've hijacked the channel. Without another word, Arik slammed the controls, shutting down the transmission and rerouting all power to defense. Too late, the radar flared red. Multiple incoming contacts appeared and, fast, coordinated, deadly. They're here, Lyra said, her voice breaking through the rising alarm. Arik jumped into the pilot's chair, engines roaring as the vigilant ray twisted sharply away from the relay's orbit. Blue plasma bolts streaked past the cockpit, shaking the ship violently. Arik gritted his teeth. Hold on, he shouted. The small human vessel darted between chunks of drifting debris, each maneuver tighter than the last. Lyra braced herself against the bulkhead, her claws gripping the frame. Her instincts screamed to fight. But this wasn't her battlefield anymore, it was his, and she trusted him. "Shields at 40%, the ship's AI reported. Arik ignored it, pushing the engines to their limit. One of the Vulpine interceptors swung in from above, plasma cannons lighting the void. Arik pulled a hard roll, sending the vigilant ray spiraling downward. The ship barely avoided a blast that vaporized a drifting satellite. Lyra's eyes darted across the tactical screen, her military training awakening. "Turn left now." 40 degrees, she commanded suddenly. Arik obeyed without question, and a bolt meant for their engines missed by meters. He glanced at her. "You've done this before," she smirked, her fangs flashing slightly. "War leaves scars, but it also teaches you how to survive." The ship shook again, a warning light flashing across the panel. "Main stabilizer hit," the AI said. "Hull integrity at 60%. Arik cursed under his breath, sweat running down his temple. Lyra moved to the weapons console, her claws dancing across the controls. "I'll handle them," she growled, voice low and fierce. 2 interceptors came in fast from the starboard side. Lyra aimed the pulse cannons and fired, twin beams slicing through the dark. The first enemy ship exploded instantly, fragments scattering like glowing shards. The second dodged but clipped a rock and spun out of control. Disappearing into the debris, Arik looked at her, amazed. "Not bad." Lyra smiled faintly. "You saved me. Now I return the favor," but their victory was short-lived. The main cruiser appeared behind them, massive and unrelenting. Its shadow swallowed their small ship completely. Arik's hands tightened around the controls. "We can't outfight that." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Then we outsmart it." She leaned close, pointing at the scanner. "Those magnetic veins near the dead moon, they can mask our signal if we fly close enough." Arik nodded. Setting a course, the engines flaring blue, the cruiser fired again, a wave of plasma surging past them, lighting the stars with deadly brilliance. The vigilant ray dove straight toward the gray surface of the dead moon, slipping into a narrow canyon of jagged rock. The cruiser hesitated to follow, its sensors losing lock inside the canyon. The turbulence rattled the ship, dust and rock smashing against the hull, but the magnetic fields worked. Their ship vanished from enemy scanners. For the first time in hours, silence returned. Broken only by their heavy breathing, Lyra leaned back, exhausted but alive, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Arik turned to her, his voice softer now. "You saved us." She shook her head. "We saved each other." He smiled faintly. "Guess that makes us partners then." Lyra's golden eyes met his, a spark passing between them, unspoken but real. As the engines cooled, the ship drifted deeper into the moon's shadow. Neither of them noticed the small red light blinking on the console, a hidden signal still broadcasting. Far away in the heart of the Vulpine Empire, a communication officer smiled coldly. "Target confirmed," she said. "Prepare the fleet." The hunt was no longer secret. It had just become personal. The dead moon hung in silence, its cracked surface glowing faintly under the starlight. Beneath its barren crust, the vigilant ray rested in a narrow canyon surrounded by jagged cliffs and magnetic storms. Arik sat in the dim cockpit, his eyes scanning the damage reports. The ship's hull was scorched, half the systems were failing, and the oxygen reserves were dropping fast. But what truly worried him was the small red light still blinking on the console. Lyra stood behind him, her fur shimmering faintly in the dark. "That's a locator beacon," she said quietly, her ears low. "They're tracking us." Arik cursed under his breath, smashing the control panel with his fist. "We must have triggered it when we boosted through the canyon." Lyra nodded grimly. "Then they're already on their way." For a moment, neither spoke, the air heavy with exhaustion and fear. Then Arik looked up at her, a faint smile on his face. "Then we make them regret coming," he said. Lyra blinked, confused. "You can't fight a fleet with a patrol ship," Arik shrugged. "No, but I can make sure they remember who they're dealing with." He stood and opened the weapons storage locker, pulling out portable power cells and field charges. Lyra watched him work, her tail flicking anxiously. "You really plan to stay and fight?" she asked. "Against an entire armada?" Arik glanced at her, his eyes calm but fierce. "Humans don't run forever," he said. "We make our stand." Lyra hesitated, torn between logic and loyalty. Her people would call it madness, but deep inside, something in her heart refused to leave him. She stepped forward, placing her hand over his. "Then I stay too," she whispered. Vulpines repay their debts. Arik met her gaze. And for the first time there was no line between alien and human. Just two warriors ready to die side by side. They worked quickly, setting traps throughout the canyon, explosive charges hidden among the rocks. Arik rerouted power to the forward guns while Lyra synchronized the magnetic interference to distort enemy targeting. Outside, faint lights appeared on the horizon. The first enemy dropships entering orbit. The silence before the storm felt endless. Arik checked his weapon. An old Terran pulse rifle scratched and worn. Lyra carried a salvaged Vulpine sidearm, its crystal core glowing like fire in her hand. "Here they come," she said softly. The ground trembled as energy blasts struck the canyon walls. Dust filled the air, shaking the ship violently. Arik gripped the controls, firing back with the main cannon. The blast tore through the first dropship, sending it crashing into the rocks below. "Hit confirmed," the AI announced. Lyra smirked. "Not bad for a human," Arik laughed. "Not bad for someone who said I was crazy." But the celebration didn't last. The main cruiser appeared above the horizon, blotting out the stars. Its shadow stretched across the canyon like the hand of death. Dozens of fighters swarmed out from its hangars, their engines screaming like banshees. Arik fired again and again, but the enemy numbers were overwhelming. Each hit shook the ship, sparks raining down from the ceiling. "Shields failing," the AI warned. "Hull breach in Section 3. Lyra leapt to the side console, rerouting power manually. Her claws sliced through the insulation, sparks flying across her fur. She screamed but didn't stop, patching the circuit with her bare hands. "Done," she gasped. "You have 30 seconds of full power," Arik nodded. "That's all I need." He turned the ship toward the canyon's exit, eyes locked on the massive cruiser in the distance. "Hang on," he shouted, and the vigilant ray roared forward, engines burning at maximum output. The fighters followed in a tight formation. Weapons blazing, Arik flew through collapsing cliffs, dodging plasma and debris. Lyra fired the forward guns, her aim deadly. Cutting through the enemy ranks, they burst out of the canyon, the cruiser's hull filling their view. Arik grinned fiercely. "Time to say hello." He armed the remaining charges, sending the signal through his wrist console. The explosives detonated behind them, collapsing the canyon and engulfing the pursuing ships in a wave of fire. The shockwave hurled the vigilant ray forward, slamming it against the cruiser's shield barrier. Alarms screamed, but Arik didn't stop. He flipped a final switch, redirecting the ship's reactor core to overload. Lyra realized what he was doing, her eyes wide. "No, you'll die," she shouted. Arik looked at her, calm and steady. "Someone has to end this," he said softly. "If humanity doesn't stand, the galaxy burns again." Lyra grabbed his hand, her claws trembling. "Then I'll stand with you," she whispered. To the end, the overloaded reactor surged with light, energy flooding through every system. Arik guided the ship straight into the cruiser's forward array. A blinding flash consumed everything. The stars, the ships, the sky. The explosion ripped through space like a second sunrise. When the light faded, the canyon was gone, and the massive cruiser drifted lifeless, torn apart. Silence returned, the kind that follows legends among the debris. A small escape pod tumbled into the void. Inside, Lyra lay unconscious, the emergency beacon pulsing weakly beside her. Her hand still held a small metal tag, Arik's dog tag. Warm from the explosion, through the faint hum of the pod, she whispered one word, half dream, half promise, human. Cold starlight washed over the drifting escape pod. Inside, Lyra lay motionless, the hum of failing systems the only sound. Her fur floated weightlessly in the stale air, silver strands catching the faint blue glow of the console. Then with a sudden gasp, her eyes opened golden and bright. Pain flooded through her body, memories hitting all at once, the canyon, the light, Arik's final words. She pushed herself up, wincing, and looked around the tiny capsule. Outside the window, wreckage glittered like frozen fireflies, the grave of a battle that would be remembered for centuries. Arik was gone, his ship reduced to ash among the stars. Only his dog tag rested against her palm. Cold metal pressed into her skin. She clenched it tightly, her throat trembling. "Not alone," she whispered. "You said we never run alone." A soft beep broke the silence. The pod's beacon had been detected. Lyra froze, unsure if it was rescue or death. Moments later, a shadow passed overhead. A human cruiser bearing Terran markings appeared. She could see the symbol of Earth etched on its hull, bold and bright. Tears blurred her vision as the docking clamps locked. Pulling her pod into safety, when the hatch opened, a squad of Terran medics surrounded her, weapons ready but eyes uncertain. She raised both hands slowly, speaking through cracked lips. "I'm Lyra of the Vulpine Guard. I carry proof, and I carry his memory." The humans hesitated until she held up Arik's tag, the name engraved deep into the metal. Their expressions changed instantly, fear fading into awe. Hours later, inside the Terran flagship Resolute Dawn, Lyra sat wrapped in a thermal blanket. Across from her stood Admiral Terran, a stern man with gray eyes and the weight of command in his voice. "You were with Captain Hayden," he said. "We received fragments of his transmission before the explosion." Lyra nodded slowly, her ears low. "He destroyed the cruiser to stop the invasion. He saved more lives than you'll ever know." Terran studied her, then looked at the tag she held. "He disobeyed orders. Risked everything for an enemy soldier," the Admiral murmured. Lyra met his gaze firmly. "No, he obeyed something higher." The room fell silent, the hum of the ship the only sound. Terran finally sighed. "You have the data he found." Lyra placed a small crystal drive on the table, the one she and Arik had pulled from the relay station. "This contains evidence that your peace treaty was being sabotaged by my own leaders," she said. "If you broadcast this, it could stop another war. But it could also start one." Terran looked down, his face unreadable. "Captain Hayden gave his life for this," he said quietly. "We'll honor it." Days passed and the transmission spread across both empires. The truth tore through layers of lies. The Vulpine High Command exposed. The planned invasion revealed. Protests erupted on Vulpine worlds, soldiers refusing to fight, citizens demanding peace. For the first time in centuries, humans and Vulpines spoke not with weapons but with grief, and every conversation began with one name: Arik Hayden, the man who saved a stranger and changed history. Lyra stood on the observation deck of the Resolute Dawn. Watching the stars turn slowly beyond the glass, the scars of battle were still visible. But so is something new. Patrols flying side by side, human and Vulpine banners together. A soft voice came from behind her, a young Terran pilot, nervous but curious. "Is it true what they say?" he asked. "That he died smiling." Lyra smiled faintly, eyes shining. "He didn't die. He became part of the stars." She pressed the dog tag to her heart, feeling its weight. "He told me once humans don't run forever," she whispered. "Now I understand." Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear his voice. Calm, steady, defiant against the dark. And in that voice she found strength. When the Terran Council offered her asylum, she accepted. But she refused to stay behind closed doors. Instead, she joined the First Joint Peace Fleet, wearing both insignias, Vulpine and human. Her mission was simple: to make sure no one ever forgot what one act of mercy could do. Whenever someone asked about the mark around her neck, she told them his story, how one human had chosen compassion over command, and the galaxy had never been the same again. As the fleet moved through the stars, Lyra stood at the viewport. The endless black stretched before her, full of danger and wonder. She touched the tag once more and whispered softly, "You kept your promise, human. You didn't run. And neither will I beyond the glass." A faint glimmer of light shimmered in the void. Some said it was just a dying star. But Lyra smiled knowingly, because somewhere out there, among the ruins of the past, she felt him, watching, guiding, eternal. And for the first time since the crash, she wasn't afraid.